with security assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, to put extraordinary pressure on Russia to cease its aggression and to shore up the defenses of our alliance. And so again, I'd invite you to go back, look at the questions that were raised starting last fall. They've been answered. Then again, when Russia committed the aggression in the first place, and even to this day. And I'm very confident that the common purpose that we've shown over many months will continue.
I can just follow up on that, because what we have seen over the last months is an unprecedented level of unity among NATO allies and partners in the response to Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. We have seen that when it comes to the provision of military support, humanitarian support, economic support, but also in the way we have seen NATO allies, partners, the European Union, implementing heavy economic sanctions we have not seen anything similar to imposed on any major country ever before. So actually what we have seen is an unprecedented level of unity among NATO allies and partners. Of course, these are difficult decisions, hard decisions, and therefore there is a need for consultations. And therefore I would also like to commend the United States for consulting so closely with allies. Not only after the invasion on the 24th of February, but actually before. The United States consulted closely, Secretary Blinken consulted closely with NATO allies throughout the autumn. We warned, we shared intelligence. There's hardly any other military invasion that has been more predicted than this one. And that's not least because the United States shared so much intelligence with NATO allies in the months leading up to the invasion in February. European allies, of course, as the United States, have imposed sanctions. They have a price, also for us. They are hosting millions of refugees. But the alternative not to support Ukraine, that will actually enable President Putin to win. That will be dangerous for all of us, and the price we have to pay will actually be higher than to now invest in the support for Ukraine. Let me end by saying that President Putin made a strategic mistake. He totally underestimated the strength and the will and the ability of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian armed forces, to defend themselves. And he underestimated the unity of NATO and NATO allies and partners to support Ukraine. And again, what we see is US leadership helping this to happen, both on the political, diplomatic level, but also when it comes to organizing and coordinating the military support through the support group for Ukraine. On the last question, I would just say that wars are unpredictable. We were able to predict the invasion, but how this war will evolve, it's very hard to predict. What we do know is that almost all wars end at some stage at the negotiating table. And this has also been clearly stated by President Zelensky, that at some stage this will end at the negotiating table. But what happens there at the negotiating table is, of course, totally dependent on the strength, the situation on the battlefield. And that's what we do. We support them in upholding the right for self-defense. And then I have trust and I have confidence in the political leadership in Ukraine that they can make the hard judgments and decisions on negotiations and what to agree to when negotiations at some point will start.
Tove Bjørgaas of NRK Norway.
Thank you. I have one question for each. Secretary Blinken, do you think it's possible to deter Russia with weapons at this point, and how far will the US go? And for Secretary Stoltenberg, we hear about nuclear exercises on the Russian side. What scenarios are you planning for in terms of the nuclear threat from Russia at this point in this war?
Thank you. I would say that it's not so much a question of deterring Russia at this point, because they have committed the aggression. and they're pursuing it. What we're working to do, and the Secretary General said this very eloquently, is to make sure that the Ukrainians have in hand what they need to defend against this aggression, to repel it, to push it back, and as well, and as a result, to make sure that they have the strongest possible hand at any negotiating table that emerges. And I agree with the Secretary General that eventually that is what is likely to happen. We can't say when, we can't say exactly how. What we can say is what we will do to make sure that Ukraine has the means to defend itself and has the strongest possible hand. At every step along the way, we have evaluated what we believe Ukraine needs to do just that, to defend itself effectively. And of course, that's changed through the course of this aggression. What they needed to deal with the threats to Kyiv are very different from what they need to deal with what's now happening in southern and eastern Ukraine. So we've adjusted as this has gone along in terms of what we and other allies and partners are providing to the Ukrainians. We'll continue to do that as we go forward. Again, it is fully within Russia's power to stop what they started and to end the aggression. That's what we seek. But as long as this goes on, we will support the Ukrainians and make sure that they have what they need to defend themselves effectively.
NATO and NATO allies are, of course, monitoring very closely what Russia does, including their nuclear exercises. And we have also followed very closely the nuclear rhetoric that President Putin and other Russian leaders have expressed over the last months. This nuclear saber-rattling rhetoric is dangerous, and it is something that is only increasing tensions. At the same time, we have not seen any changes in Russia's nuclear posture, and we also remind Russia on the fact that actually as late as in January they agreed in the UN a statement where they stated clearly that the nuclear war cannot be won and should not be fought. So Russia knows that any use of nuclear weapons would totally change the nature of a conflict, and therefore nuclear weapons should not be used.
Kylie Atwood of CNN.
Thank you. Good morning. Secretary Blinken, two questions for you. First, on the food crisis that is growing deeper because of the war, is there any way to get the 20 million plus tons of grain that are stuck in Odessa right now out of the country without Russia allowing those Ukrainian ships to move? And what will be the cost for Russia if they don't allow those ships to move? We know that the United States is working on overland solutions here, but what is the cost for Russia if they don't allow the sea routes to open? And then the second question is about the timeline here. We've heard Biden administration officials talking about this conflict turning into a drawn-out conflict. It's likely to go on for months. But with Russia making these gains in the east now, what is the outlook? Do you see this conflict going into next year without a resolution? And then NATO Secretary General, you mentioned that you're going to convene leaders of Finland, Sweden, and Turkey in the coming days. So I'm wondering if you are expecting Sweden and Finland to come to the table with precise actions they are willing to take that could assuage Turkey's concerns. And I'm also wondering if you're confident that Turkey's concerns about their membership will be addressed this month before the G7 summit. Thank you.
Kylie, thanks very much. With regard to the food situation, a couple of things. First, we are dealing with what is a global food insecurity challenge and even crisis. Pre-existing conditions, COVID, climate, and now conflict. All of these together have helped create a perfect storm where food, particularly from some of the bread baskets for the world, Ukraine, Russia itself, are not available because of Russia's aggression. And as a result as well, prices have gone up for the food that is available. And we had a situation where a couple of years ago there were roughly 100 million people who were food insecure around the world. before the Russian aggression over the last couple of years, that's gone up to about 160 million. Now, an additional 40 million people, by expert accounts, are likely to be food insecure as a result directly of the Russian aggression. Because, to your point, what's happening is this. There are roughly 20 to 25 million tons of grain that are sitting in silos near Russian, Ukrainian ports in Odessa that can't even be moved to ships, in part because there are ships at the Odessa port, about 85 of them, full of this grain and wheat that can't move because of the Russian effective blockade of the ports. So the United Nations has been working, and the Secretary General, I applaud his efforts to see if he can find a way forward on this to allow the ships out to end this blockade. That work continues. At the same time, we're looking at every other possible route to get wheat, grains, other things out of Ukraine and onto world markets. All of that work is ongoing. In terms of what Russia risks, well, I would start with what's left of its reputation. It seeks relationships with countries around the world, including many countries that are now the victim of Russian aggression because of growing food insecurity resulting from that aggression. We were in New York about 10 days ago. We had the presidency, as you know, of the Security Council for the month of May. I focused our efforts on the food insecurity challenges that are being faced around the world. And many countries pointed out that a big part of this is the Russian aggression and the fact that food can't get out of Ukraine to where it's needed. So I think there's a growing recognition of countries around the world that the challenges that they're facing now, compounded by conflict, compounded by Russia's aggression, are due to what Russia is doing. I'd point out again that to those who are concerned that the sanctions we've imposed on Russia are somehow impeding the delivery of food, that is simply not true. The sanctions have exemptions for food, and including services necessary to make sure that food moves, like banking services. We've had one of our senior officials go around the world to make that very clear to other countries and to help them with any questions they may have. This is on Russia. And regardless of anything else, you would think the least that the Russians would do would be to make sure that other countries are not suffering from their aggression, despite the suffering they're imposing on the Ukrainians. With regard to timelines, Secretary General said it well, we can't predict how this is going to play out, when this is going to play out. As best we can assess right now, we are still looking at many months of conflict. Again, that could be over tomorrow if Russia chose to end the aggression. We don't see any signs of that right now, but it's a moving picture, as the Secretary General said. That's by definition what wars are, and I'll just repeat what I said. As long as this goes on, we want to make sure that Ukraine has in hand what it needs to defend itself, and we want to make sure that Russia is feeling strong pressure from as many countries as possible to end the aggression. That's the best way, we think, to bring the aggression to a close as soon as possible, to end the war, to get to diplomacy, and to stop the suffering.
On Finland and Sweden, I and my staff, we are in close contact, of course, with Turkey, an important NATO ally, and the two countries that have applied for NATO membership, Finland and Sweden. We have met with them, and I'm going to convene a meeting in a few days with senior officials, and then follow up to ensure that we make progress on the applications of Finland and Sweden to join NATO. My intention is to have this in place before the NATO summit. At the same time, I know that to make progress, we need 30 allies to agree. Finland and Sweden have made it clear that they are ready to sit down and to address the concerns expressed by Turkey. And all NATO allies are, of course, ready to sit down and address those concerns, including the threats posed to Turkey by PKK. And this is terrorist threats, which, of course, is something we are taking very seriously. We know that no other NATO ally have suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey. And that Turkey is an important ally, not least because of its strategic geographic location bordering Iraq and Syria. They have been important in our fight against ISIS, and also a Black Sea country, close to Russia. So all of this makes Turkey an important ally. When they raise concerns, of course, we sit down and we look into how we can find a united way forward.
We'll take a final question from Stefan Asperg of SVT Sweden.
Secretary Blinken, two questions. Specifically, what is the U.S. willing to do to facilitate the negotiations between Turkey, Sweden, and Finland?
Were there two questions?
Please go
I
ahead.
can only ask one at a time.
One at a time, okay. Thank you. You've heard from the Secretary General. Finland and Sweden are working directly with Turkey. NATO is supporting this effort. The Secretary General will bring the parties together. We very much support those efforts. There is a strong consensus within NATO broadly for the rapid accession of Sweden and Finland to the alliance. I remain very confident that that will happen, that we're going to move forward. As I've said before, this is a process, and in that process, if allies have concerns, they raise them, and then we deal with them. NATO is dealing with them, but in particular, concerns that Turkey has raised directly with Finland and Sweden are being addressed by the Finns and the Swedes with the assistance of NATO. We want to make sure that all allies have their security concerns taken into account, and that of course includes Turkey, but I'm confident this process will move forward.
Are U.S. willing to export fighter jets to Turkey, for instance, to ease up the situation?
These are separate questions. We have a long-standing and ongoing defense relationship with Turkey as a NATO ally, and as we have in the past, as we're doing now, as we will in the future, we'll continue to work through cases as they arise with regard to systems that Turkey seeks to acquire.
And Secretary Stoltenberg, how confident are you that Turkey will approve Sweden and Finland?
I'm confident that we will find a way forward, and I am confident because all allies agree that NATO enlargement has been a great success, helping to spread democracy, freedom across Europe for decades. Therefore, we need to sit down, as we always do when there are different views in NATO, and find a way to go forward together. So this is not the first time in NATO that some allies express concerns that there are some differences, some disagreements. But we have a long track record in NATO also to be able to overcome those differences and then agree on how to move forward.
That concludes the press conference. Thank you,
Thanks,
gentlemen.
everyone.
Thank you.
Right, Antony Blinken and the NATO head Jens Stoltenberg speaking in Washington on what is being done to prevent an escalation in this conflict, given the new long-range rocket systems being sent by the US into the theatre of war. Antony Blinken said it is Russia attacking Ukraine. The best way to avoid escalation, he said, is for Russia to stop the war. He said he sees no sign of that now and said this could drag on for many months to come. He also said Ukraine has committed to not use these US-provided systems on targets inside Russian territory. To be clear, the US is actually not sending long-range munitions. On Finland and Sweden seeking NATO membership, Antony Blinken said the US strongly supports their application and wants to see them as NATO members as quickly as possible. Finland and Sweden, he said, are working directly with Turkey, who at present does not support their membership. And the NATO chief on that point said all 30 allies need to agree to accept Sweden and Finland as members. And he said he is ready to address Turkey's concerns, describing Ankara as an important ally. And in response to a question about fears of a nuclear escalation, Jens Stoltenberg said NATO and NATO allies are monitoring closely Russia's nuclear exercises. He said this nuclear saber rattling is dangerous and increasing tensions, but he said he has seen no changes in Russia's nuclear posture. Lots to get through here. CNN's Alex Marquardt is following today's developments in Washington. And we expected both to address the announcement of the provision of new long-range rocket systems to Ukraine by the US. And indeed, they did, and that's where some of the questions came in. What do we hear?
Well, Becky, I thought it was a very interesting, wide-ranging press conference from both men, neither of whom, frankly, are known for making too much news when they step up to these podiums, but they were asked about all sorts of things, all issues of the day, and perhaps most importantly, this announcement by the Biden administration that they will be sending a new package of weapons that will include these rockets that can reach around 80 kilometers in terms of their range. Becky, I thought it was very interesting that President Blinken was pushing this line that we're now hearing more and more from the Biden administration, that the U.S. is sending to Ukraine precisely what they need, and precisely what they need to have the strongest possible hand at a negotiating table, acknowledging that this war one day will end at the negotiating table. Becky, there's a big difference between what the U.S. believes Ukraine needs and what Ukraine believes Ukraine needs. So what we have now is, yes, the U.S. sending this advanced long-range rocket system called a HIMARS. It's a very mobile unit that is armored. It's on wheels. It can what they call shoot and scoot. So it fires off and then it moves very quickly. But they are not sending the rockets with the longest range capabilities. As I mentioned, the rockets that Ukraine will be getting have a range of around 50 miles or 80 kilometers, which will allow the Ukrainian forces to fire at Russian forces in the distance as they move westwards into the Donbass region. However, we heard from President Zelensky just yesterday saying that in order to recapture Ukrainian cities, in order to open those land routes, open those sea routes through the Black Sea in order to get food out, they need rockets that have a range between 100 and 140 kilometers. So there is a real difference there. It's not necessarily, Becky, that the U.S. doesn't trust Ukraine to fire on Russia. And we should note that there have been a number of cross-border incidents into Russia that Ukraine has neither confirmed nor denied. But this is highlighting the concern by the Biden administration that if they were to send the longest range munitions, that Russia would see this as an escalation. And indeed, we are hearing the Kremlin today saying that they are seeing these new munitions as a provocation. Becky?
Fascinating. I think it's really important that you bring up that both of these gentlemen suggested this war will end at the negotiating table, that they suggest providing as much leverage ahead of that for Ukraine. Perhaps at some point, it is that the West will say, you've had your lot, you've got to negotiate. And the question will be whether Ukrainians really believe they got what they needed in order to sufficiently push back against the Russians. Fascinating. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, is this a show of solidarity for Russia? We look at the Russian foreign minister's meeting with his Gulf counterparts in Saudi Arabia. And ahead on the show, as people are finally able to leave their homes in Shanghai, the relief but also anger that lingers in China's business capital. That coming up after this.
Connecting Africa in association with Afreximbank.
Opay is Nigeria's foremost financial inclusion service provider. Everywhere in Nigeria today, even in the remotest part of Nigeria, we have a large agency banking business with more than 500,000 agents across Nigeria. But we're also the last mile in terms of access to financial services for more than 10 million Nigerians, many of which do not have any form of bank account through the Opay digital wallet. We go to where banks cannot go to. We are much more nimble. We are more tech-oriented. Therefore, we can deploy in a more agile way and get to reach far many more areas. That is where you find Opay. The excluded in Nigeria will be truly brought into the formal financial services, and that's our mission.
Connecting Africa in association with Afreximbank.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
Malumnis, it's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
It's a mystery that gripped the world.
If you have Madeline, let her come home to her mummy daddy, brother and sister.
A young girl's disappearance from a seaside resort.
Please give our little girl back.
15 years later, a major break.
Portuguese authorities have said that they have named a suspect.
CNN investigates.
So to be clear, the formal suspect is a convicted rapist and a known pedophile.
Missing Madeleine McCann, Saturday.
Relief has finally come to Shanghai in China as the government there finally loosens COVID restrictions that had people confined to their homes or quarantine centres for over 2 months. But for many, there is still lingering bitterness over having been put through what they describe as a draconian lockdown. Not everyone is allowed to leave their homes just yet, and many rules are still in place. CNN's Selena Wang is in Beijing, and she joins me now live. And I've seen your report that our viewers are about to see, and some of the images are really quite remarkable. And I think there will be people watching this around the world who are astonished to see the sort of what is going on in Shanghai, and will understand why people are so frustrated there. Just describe what's going on. One of those times, isn't
Becky,
it? When
sorry, you're just breaking up. Becky, well, actually, a lot of our report is being censored on this topic, and you were just breaking up in my ear earlier. But while most of Shanghai's 25 million residents are allowed out, more than 500,000, however, are still remaining in lockdown. And for some people, this is going to be short-lived freedom, because if a new COVID case is found, that person and all their close contacts, they've got to go to quarantine facilities, and the community is then back into lockdown. And the days leading up to this moment, Becky, they have been utter chaos.
Sprinting with shopping bags, residents racing to get out. After more than 2 months of a brutal citywide lockdown, Shanghai is finally cracking open the seal. The city's main train station packed with people trying to escape, but actually getting out of here is a treacherous journey. The city says it will fully resume transportation today. But earlier, people have been seen trekking miles across highways, dragging their luggage or strapping it to bikes. Even journeys of dozens of miles or more, not swaying their determination. The train station parking lot has become a campsite, some leaving days earlier than their departure time, terrified they could be locked down again if they stay at home. The masses outside the train station, a stark contrast to the rest of Shanghai. Hundreds of thousands still remain locked in. But even the lucky ones allowed out face a laundry list of restrictions. There are checkpoints everywhere.
No, this is definitely not freedom.
This Shanghai resident and her son, who wished to remain anonymous for fear of persecution from authorities, were finally allowed out after more than 80 days. Her only solace is seeing her son outside and smiling for the first time in a long time.
My child now has depression because of the lockdown. He started waking up at night and crying and shouting and saying there were people wearing masks in his bedroom, and he stopped eating.
That harsh reality miles away from what the government wants to show. Watch this state TV reporter pull the microphone and camera away during a live interview when the resident starts to complain about the lockdown. She says, "I've never lived through anything like this, being locked inside your home and not allowed to go out. What a big joke." Officials say the city will start returning to normal in June, but residents are doubtful.
So this does feel like endless nightmare.
Her freedom lasted less than a week. One COVID case was found near her, so she's back to lockdown. For over 2 months, Shanghai has had its freedom taken away. Residents imprisoned at home or forced into quarantine centers like these. No one knows when this nightmare will fully end.
And Becky, authorities here have actually refused to acknowledge that it was in fact a lockdown, instead calling it, quote, static management mode. That has caused frustration and bitterness among residents who say authorities are not acknowledging the suffering and the struggles they've been through. In fact, the entirety of this report and what I'm saying right now is all being censored on TV screens in China. All you are seeing is color bars. So a mixture of relief, joy, but also anxiety and anger in Shanghai. Becky.
Selena Wang on the story for you. Thank you. Well, still ahead, Russia's foreign minister is in Saudi Arabia in a seeming show of solidarity with Gulf states. What is the US doing to keep up its relations with Riyadh? Well, we will discuss all of that up next.
When you grow more, you'll naturally have more to balance. With an expanding community of female entrepreneurs and 22% of working Africans starting businesses, support for new and growing enterprises across the continent has never been more important. Access Bank's digital loans have so far provided over 260 billion naira to upwards of 1.8 million customers and counting. Access, more than banking.
So many questions about what is the federal government doing. Do you get the anger that is out here?
How concerned are you about the front line?
You don't believe that there's a racial divide here?
Looking back, as president, did you tell the story of race in America enough, do you think? All the places I've been and all the things I've seen, all the people I've talked to, I carry with me. They're a part of what I do right here, holding the powerful accountable, keeping them honest.
AC 360, Tuesday through Saturday only on CNN.
I'm Timothy Kelly, and I am the Managing Director of Atlantis Dubai. What we're bringing to the table this week is Atlantis the Royal, and it's a new resort that we're unveiling, and we call it the most luxurious ultra-luxury resort in the world. If you look around us, even today, what do you see? You see competition. You see Saudi Arabia, you see Oman, you see all of the different surrounding GCC countries that are all striving and driving and focused on tourism. And so in order to continue to be competitive, you need to continue to evolve. It's quite an undertaking and quite a challenge. And so this product is something that all of Dubai and all of the surrounding world will want to see and experience and learn more about as we unveil it in the fourth quarter of this year.
I'm David McKenzie in Cape Town, and this is CNN.
Russia's foreign minister continuing his Middle East tour today with a visit to Saudi Arabia. Sergei Lavrov sat down with his Gulf counterparts in Riyadh. Now, that followed a stop in Bahrain on Tuesday, the same day the EU announced a ban on most Russian oil imports. Note, the OPEC Plus alliance, which Russia, of course, is a part of, meets tomorrow. And that meeting in Riyadh comes amid reports oil producers are exploring the idea of suspending Russia from the OPEC Plus production deal. Reuters reports that was not discussed in today's OPEC Plus joint technical meeting in Vienna. There's quite a lot to unpack here. Faisal Abbas is editor-in-chief of Arab News. And your organisation conducted a poll with YouGov, which examined the attitudes on the Arab street to the conflict in Ukraine. The findings were quite illuminating. They suggest an apathy and disinterest in the Arab world towards this atrocious conflict. Faisal, 66% of respondents said they had no stance on the war, while those who did choose a side were almost evenly divided. 18% backed Ukraine and 16% backed Russia. You're joining me from our studio in Dubai today, and I want to discuss what we think that poll really revealed. Before we do that, what do you believe the aim of Lavrov's visit is to Riyadh to meet his Gulf counterparts, and what do you believe will be achieved?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show, Becky. I believe the GCC ministerial level meeting, which Secretary Lavrov attended, shows a unified GCC position behind Saudi Arabia, which has clearly said from the beginning that we wish to become a mediator and try to have a positive impact on finding a peaceful resolution to this conflict. I just wish to remind remind your viewers also that the Saudi foreign minister met with his Ukrainian counterpart last week in Davos, and I believe there's been also a Zoom meeting between the GCC ministers and the Ukrainian foreign minister via Zoom today. So if anything, it shows that on this conflict, Saudi Arabia and the GCC is putting their efforts where their words are and trying to mediate between both parties.
Right. What they haven't done, and I'm specifically speaking to the Saudis here, is sort of bend to the will of Washington, which has lent heavily, as we understand it, into Riyadh to actually take a side in all of this, not least when it comes to upping the support for the oil market as Russia is heavily sanctioned by the West. Do you believe that we are seeing a body of Gulf states who to this point have stayed neutral in this Russia-Ukraine conflict, despite these Western calls to help isolate Mossad? Do you believe that there is a pivot in that position at this point or not?
Well, if you'd allow me, Becky, I would beg to differ. Saudi Arabia and I believe the United Arab Emirates and most GCC countries have condemned the aggression on Ukraine on a UN level. Now, I'm not an oil expert and I don't really understand the mechanics of the oil market, but at least what we're seeing here is a positive contribution towards this conflict. At the end of the day, both parties need to be talking to a trusted partner, and I think the GCC as a bloc can provide that. Whether or not Saudi Arabia or oil exporting countries cut down or increase rather their production is a fair question. But a fairer question would also be, why hasn't the EU, for example, Germany? We've heard in the report earlier that they've just yesterday, 3 months, 100 days actually into the conflict, finally decided to stop importing oil. The EU pays €1 billion a day to Russia for oil and gas. Nobody's talking about the gas. So, if sanctions is what will solve this conflict, then surely the European Union should start first.
Yeah, Faisal, I hear what you're saying, and you're making some very valid points. And unfortunately, I have run out of time with you today because we had to rightly cover the Stoltenberg-Blinken press conference. I will have you back because this is a conversation we should continue. Faisal Abbas has probably forgotten more about Gulf politics than most of us will ever know. So you're an important asset to the show, Faisal. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I've got to take a short break at this point. Back after this.
Egypt is transitioning towards a sustainable, circular economy. Through the opening of the Gabal Al Asfar wastewater treatment plant, it is using treated water to irrigate agricultural land and is producing organic fertilizers. The plant has been designed to reduce waste and optimizes the use of water resources. It generates electricity and saves carbon emissions, ensuring that over 8 million people across the country live better, healthier lives.
It really only takes a few moments to gain an appreciation of just how tough it is out here. They've been coming across sniper fire, gunfire, mortar rounds. You can see really just how intense it is here.
We have to wrap it up right now. Quite anxious about spending too much time on scene.
Those with the kids really struggling to get away.
They feel like they won't be able to outrun the war.
They thought the whole border was open. People are just trying to bust through towards what they think is going to be a better life. These nurses, these doctors really have nerves of steel.
We can't help but be struck by how interconnected our world is.
Arwa Damon, CNN.
The world's biggest business stories. From every corner of the globe. Marketplace Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East.
Coronavirus. To get daily news updates in your inbox, sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus. Fact versus fiction.
Well, if you are in the UK or headed here for the next 4 days, prepare to party. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II is celebrating 70 years on the throne, a first for any British monarch. It all started here back in the early 1950s when a 25-year-old Princess Elizabeth was driven in a golden carriage to Westminster Abbey and crowned following the death of her father, King George VI. It was the first time a coronation service was televised. Well, 25 years later, the Queen celebrated the Silver Jubilee, with the UK just recovering from a recession caused by the 1973 oil crisis. I remember that. We had a street party. Times were hard, and not unlike today. There was a cost of living crisis, but despite that, there were thousands of spirited street parties like the one held where I lived as a kid. Fast forward to 2002, and there's the gold stage coach again. It's been 50 years since the coronation, and by the way, that coach has been around for 260 years. Well, it might look nice, but it makes for an uncomfortable ride, according to both Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth, and King George VI. Well, 10 years ago, Her Majesty reached another milestone, her Diamond Jubilee. Only one other monarch has reached 60 years on the throne, and that was Queen Victoria. A flotilla of boats took to the river, and though the day was rather cloudy and windy, the royal barge was cheered by thousands of people lining the river. Well, this Thursday marks a first, as I mentioned, the start of a 4-day party for what is the Platinum Jubilee, an occasion for the country to deck their houses with flags and decorate even post boxes with knitted corgis, tea cozies, if you will. The highlight of Thursday will be the Trooping of the Colour, and here you can see the horses taken for rehearsals. The Golden Coach has also been seen on the streets of London for the first time in 20 years. The Queen not expected to ride inside this time. She will, though, appear on the balcony, we are told, at Buckingham Palace to wave at crowds for the first time without her husband, Prince Philip. Of course, he passed away last year. Other senior royals are expected to be represented and present with the Queen at celebrations in Wales, in Northern Ireland and Scotland. We will have extensive coverage of the Queen's Jubilee in the coming days. Well, if you don't follow golf closely, there is, I will tell you, a spot of trouble on the green. The PGA is far from happy with a decision taken by two-time major winner Dustin Johnson. This has to do with a lucrative offer that the US golfer felt, well, he could not refuse. World Sport anchor Patrick Snell to explain exactly what it is that Johnson has done, which has angered the PGA as much as it has. Patrick?
Yeah, Becky, hi. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out, because we're all watching with intent, because America's PGA Tour, remember, has not granted permission for its players to compete elsewhere, and they could reportedly be set to face punishment for their decision. So the ball now very much in the PGA Tour's court. Johnson has a huge stature in the game, no question. He's a former world number one, Becky, a two-time major winner. He's won the US Open, he's won the Masters, but we now know he's going to be the headline act at the highly controversial and lucrative Saudi-backed league, whose CEO is Aussie golf great Greg Norman. And I'm hearing that we have just heard from the PGA Tour, so we'll get to that in World Sport in just a few moments, Becky.
You are such a tease. That is coming up after this short break. That's it from us. Same place, same time tomorrow. See you then.
What do you see when you look at the surface? Just that, the surface. But dive deeper and new possibilities emerge. Essential intelligence from S&P Global takes you here, providing the data, risk assessment, and workflow solutions you need to plumb the wonders beneath. A better, more prosperous future awaits. It's yours for the seeking. S&P Global. Seek and prosper.
African Voices Changemakers, in association with Glow Unlimited.
I'm using my art to heal myself, to discover my worth, and to heal the universe.
Lizette Shirimi uses rich textiles, bold colors, and recycled materials to create mixed media masterpieces.
I began to collect all the items on the floor that I thought they would be useful. I picked up all the buttons, all the small metals.
Today, she's going to the market to source new materials.
The market is called Giwa. I began to work with the Capulana because Capulana he brings lots of colors and there's a cultural value. Nice material.
Hi there, welcome to CNN World Sport Today, where we're counting down now to today's going to be a emotion-filled World Cup playoff qualifier in Glasgow, where Scotland will be hosting Ukraine, a match unlike any other. 32 nations will be competing in the World Cup in Qatar later on this year. We know the identity thus far of all but three. The winner of today's match in Glasgow, Ukraine, will then be playing Wales on Sunday. It's going to be Ukraine or Scotland to face Wales. Whoever emerges will be joining England, Iran and the USA in Group B in November. Now, Ukraine hasn't played a competitive match since Russia's invasion of their homeland in February. But as they try to qualify for the World Cup, they're going to be having the support, no question, of so many people around the world, and emotions certain to be running very high indeed later at Hampden Park. These now the very powerful and really heartbreaking words of Ukraine's Oleksandr Zinchenko. Take a listen.
Що я мрію про те, щоб війна закінчилась. Але якщо кажучи про футбол, то у нас теж є мрія. У нас є своя мрія. Мрія поїхати на чемпіонат світу. Та подарувати ці емоції українцям. В цей непростий час. Тому що вони цього заслуговують.
Oh, just really poignant indeed to hear those words. My CNN World Sport colleague Alex Thomas for us in Glasgow and was right there at that news conference. Alex, it must have been so very moving to be there. Just how unusual is it to see that kind of raw emotion?
Very unusual, Patrick. A very somber mood in that news conference. And the other unusual thing was to see Zinchenko applauded out of the room. He left early to go and join his teammates for their last practice before the match later on Wednesday. And, you know, journalists are there to be impartial, not to applaud one side or the other, but everyone knew what he was going through. And he said at another point in that press conference, I can't describe what it's like to be playing football, knowing the heartache and misery going on back home. You have to be in my position to feel it. And we all understood that. And in fact, Scotland do as well. Ukraine in a tough position. The players know what's going on back home, but they've been told from the very top, right up to Ukrainian President Zelensky, to focus on the football, to try and put a smile back on the faces of their compatriots by winning this football match. Yes, it's just a game, but it's taken on a wider significance. Only once as an independent nation since the breakup of the former Soviet Union have Ukraine qualified for a men's FIFA World Cup during the golden era of Andrei Shevchenko. And they would love to do that again. That was back in 2006. You have to go back even further for the last time Scotland reached a men's FIFA World Cup. But there will not only be a couple of thousand Ukraine fans in Hampden Park behind me cheering them on, but probably a lot of goodwill amongst the Scottish population generally. We know they've been given a warm welcome. Some refugees from the Ukrainian war have been housed here in Scotland, some given free tickets to this game. They're going to put the words to the Ukraine national anthem on the seats of spectators in the hope that they'll join in singing it. And I think some probably will. And we already know that anecdotally, many famous former Scottish players have said they'll kind of be supporting Ukraine in some way as well. So a lot of goodwill for Ukraine, but they know that when it comes to the actual match, they still need to play good enough football to get past Scotland later on Wednesday and indeed Wales in Cardiff on Sunday if they're to reach Qatar 2022, Patrick.
Yeah, there's the game in hand, the serious business of the game in hand, albeit, you know, it's going to be so emotional, is it, Alex? I wonder, how do you feel Scotland are going to be approaching this match?
Yeah, definitely mixed feelings. They know they need to focus on what they have to do and try and ignore the situation Ukraine are in, although Ukraine have praised Scotland for agreeing so readily to delay this match in the first place from when it was originally scheduled, to give them enough time to try and prepare for it. They've had a month in Slovenia warming up for it, had 3 games against club sides to try and get back into the mood and try and shake off the rust. And this was what the Scotland manager, Steve Clarke, made of it.
Nothing but good thoughts for them and good wishes for them, except during the game, because obviously they want to go to Qatar and represent their country, but I'm desperate to go to Qatar with Scotland. My staff are desperate to go, and most importantly, our players are desperate to take their country to a World Cup final, so that's what we focus on.
And normally Scotland are really assured of a noisy and passionate following. I don't expect that to change once the whistle for the start of the game goes. Around 50,000 expected here in Hampden Park, a complete sellout.
Yeah, and in terms of the game itself, purely now, Alex, in footballing terms, how might it all play out? What do you think?
It's hard to tell, Patrick. Ukraine are undercooked in football terms, but are ranked higher in the world. They've got really fond memories of Hampden Park, because they beat Sweden here in the European Championships last year, 2-1, going on to a quarter-final where they lost to eventual finalists England. But Scotland had the better record in qualifying, although they both finished runners-up in their group. Ukraine only won twice, although the rest were all draws. They weren't beaten by the world champions France in that qualifying process. Scotland had far more wins in their group, but they're both here in a playoff. It's a one-off game, so really anything can happen.
And we shall see later on today. Alex Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today in Glasgow. Well, back in February this year, US golf superstar Dustin Johnson saying he was fully committed to the PGA Tour. Now, though, ahead of the controversial Saudi-backed league, the dramatic U-turn the former Masters champion has just made, and what his agent says actually prompted it.
To open doors, to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets, it takes trust.
It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera.
Trust that you'll listen.
So great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest. I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them? Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair. It was an unprecedented move, very eerie. All the roads have been closed off. Describe the theme that you arrived to. The Apache attack helicopter. This is what Captain Wales has been flying. Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amounts of police support coming into this protest. We continue to monitor the government in crisis. This was the Duchess's first news interview.
Rare access indeed.
That's what it's all about. Max Foster, CNN.
Across Africa, businesses are working together like never before. All new on CNN, Connecting Africa.
Join me and Lenny Jokos as we crisscross the continent to show you how new connections are revolutionizing commerce in Africa.
This month, Connecting Africa through technology.
The fintech space in Nigeria and across Africa is really growing very well.
Connecting Africa on CNN, in association with Afreximbank.
Welcome back. A 33rd straight victory now for top-ranked Iga Swiatek a little early at the French Tennis Open in Paris as the recently turned 21-year-old booking her spot in the last 4. Her birthday was yesterday and she celebrates with a really impressive victory today. Another one. The Polish player just too good for Jessica Pegula of the United States. The 2020 Roland Garros champ seeing off her American opponent very comfortably indeed in straight sets, 3-2. Next up for Swiatek in the semis, the number 20 seed from Russia, Daria Kasatkina. Well, the world of tennis still very much abuzz after another epic confrontation between the sport's two undisputed greats. I'm talking Rafa Nadal and Novak Djokovic, a hugely anticipated encounter. It started around 9 p.m. local time and didn't end until after 1 a.m. the following morning. The man from Mallorca, who's going for a record-extending 22nd Grand Slam title, had been pushed to the limits, remember, by the young Canadian player Felix Auger-Aliassime in the round of 16, but he would come out really blistering fashion here in this quarterfinal. Classic, all business, all focus. Nadal taking the opener 6-2. Now, Djokovic had to call upon all his famed powers of grit and resilience, And in a second set that lasted 88 minutes, he produces the response many were expecting, levelling the match at 1-all. Bear in mind, too, the Serbian player was aiming for career major number 21 to tie Nadal, but that just really seemed to fire Nadal up. He takes the third 6-2, and the fourth set serving up some stunning play as well between these two ferocious rivals. Nadal saving 2